Okay, so let's dig into this. Life, well, it feels like it can change just like that, you know, in an instant.
Hmm.
And often it's something totally out of the blue, like getting a chronic illness diagnosis.
Yeah.
And it's not just a physical thing, is it? The sources you share, they make it so clear this just shakes everything up. Your sense of who you are, your relationships, the whole picture you had for your future.
Absolutely. It's this profound disruption, reaches into every single corner of your life, way beyond just the medical side of things.
Right. So our mission here in this deep dive, we're going to take this stack of sources you gave us. It's a really potent mix. Personal stories from people living with it, some incredibly honest stuff from places like Reddit, and then articles from health and wellness folks too.
Yeah, good range.
And we want to really get into those core challenges, but also the coping mechanisms, kind of extract those key insights, explore the impacts, sure, but also how people are actually navigating all this complexity, how they're building resilience, and ultimately sort of redefining what a full life can even look like.
It's about understanding that lived experience, yeah.
Yeah.
Moving beyond the clinical diagnosis and really grasping the human reality of it all.
Exactly. And that first shock wave,
Yeah.
it seems like it hits right at the diagnosis stage.
Yeah, and what's really striking is how often it's described as a double-edged sword.
A double-edged sword. Okay, tell me more about that. What are the sources saying?
Well, on one side, there's often this huge sense of relief. Maybe you've been searching for answers for ages, right?
Uh,
So finally knowing what's wrong, putting a name to the struggle, that can feel validating.
I can imagine. Like, okay, I'm not crazy.
Exactly. But then the other edge, and the sources really emphasize this, it's the harsh truth. The fact that you are unwell, that your body or part of it isn't working right in a pretty significant way. One source called Facing That, just incredibly difficult.
Wow, yeah, that must be tough.
Mm.
And that knowledge, especially um, for illnesses you can't really see, that seems to bring this really powerful sense of isolation.
It really does. This feeling of being like fundamentally separate from the world around you. If you don't necessarily look sick, as one source put it, people just can't see what's going on inside.
Right.
It's described as living in two different worlds. There's the internal reality where the illness, the symptoms, it's never far from their mind. And then there's the outside world where you might feel you have to, pretend everything's fine, hide the struggle.
God, that constant internal awareness must be absolutely exhausting. And the sources keep bringing up grief and loss, but they frame it like differently than how we usually think about grief.
Yeah, what really stands out is this idea of grief and chronic illness being nonlinear. It's not like, say, mourning a death where there's a definite event and then hopefully over time some kind of resolution.
Right.
With chronic illness, there isn't really that end point. The diagnosis is maybe a beginning, but the grief, it's ongoing. It sticks around.
So it's not something you just like process and get over.
Pretty much. It's described as a series of emotional highs and lows. It goes up and down with your symptoms, how treatment's going, good days, bad days. It makes processing it all incredibly complex because the loss itself is persistent. It changes.
And the layers of loss mentioned.
Yeah.
Wow, they're staggering. It's not just, relationships changing or maybe fading away.
No, not at all. The sources really zeroed in on this deep, significant loss of parts of yourself, your identity, the person you used to be, the things you did, the hobbies that maybe defined you, even your career path, perhaps. You lose physical abilities, maybe mental sharpness you counted on. And maybe the most powerful thing is losing that vision you had for your future, the life you thought you were going to live.
Losing the future you planned. That feels like losing your relationship with yourself in a way. That really lands heavily.
Which, brings up a really critical question from all this. How do you navigate grief that doesn't really end and losses that fundamentally reshape who you even feel you are?
And these impacts, they don't just stay with the person, do they? They sort of ripple out, hitting mental health relationships.
Oh, absolutely. The link between chronic illness and mental health challenges is really strong in these sources. For people who already had things like anxiety or OCD, they report those conditions coming back in full force or getting significantly worse.
And for others, it triggers completely new struggles. I saw one account mentioning feeling depressed for the very first time, calling it scary and overwhelming. There's even talk about dealing with trauma from the whole illness experience itself.
Yeah, the mental load is just immense, and it can really mess with your self-perception in difficult ways. There's this powerful example from one of the Reddit discussions
Okay.
describing intense feelings of self-loathing, guilt, this distorted view where they felt like they'd failed as a woman or even robbed their husband because physical limits affected intimacy or their ability to have kids biologically, it leads to these deep feelings of just not being worthy.
Oof. That feeling of being a burden or like you're not enough,
Yeah.
that clearly resonates with a lot of people facing this.
Yeah.
The sources also mentioned intrusive thoughts being a symptom sometimes, which must be incredibly hard to control, adding another layer of distress.
Right. And all of this, understandably, puts a massive strain on relationships. It's hard for others to really get it when you don't necessarily look sick or when your pain is all over the place. Even well-meaning people might think you're just, I don't know, being a baby or not coping well enough.
And the practical side, the burden is real too. Loved ones often have to step up massively, taking on caregiving, household stuff. Like one source just said simply, God bless all of the spouses, partners, and close friends who do that.
It's a huge adjustment for everyone. And sometimes, out of pure pain or frustration, the person who's ill might unintentionally lash out at the people closest to them, even the super supportive ones. It creates really complex dynamics.
We saw that complexity really laid bare in that Reddit thread you pointed out, where the user shared her struggle with how RA pain and infertility were affecting her marriage.
Yes, that was such a poignant example. She described her husband as being incredibly supportive, right? But her physical limits created this distance, intimacy issues, and it shattered their shared dream of having biological kids. Her fear was so intense, she actually gave him permission to be physically intimate elsewhere. But then it became emotionally agonizing for her when she felt like he was forming this deeper bond with another family he was helping out.
Her vulnerability, that fear of being replaced, of just not being enough.
Yeah.
You could really feel it. And the community response on that thread,
Yeah.
it's quite instructive, isn't it?
Right.
Shows what kind of support actually helps.
Totally. They overwhelmingly validated her feelings, saying really powerfully, it is not your fault. And they pushed back hard against that distorted idea that she'd failed him or robbed him.
That validation seems key.
Absolutely. And they strongly urged open, honest communication with her husband about her fears, her feelings, and professional help was a big theme. Individual therapy for her self-worth stuff, couples therapy to work through the strain on the marriage, even sex therapy to tackle the intimacy challenges from the RA pain specifically.
They also encourage them, as a couple, to look into other ways to have a family together, like adoption or surrogacy, basically saying don't give up on the dream just because the path looks different now.
Right. That discussion about family building options, while specific there, it really highlighted the need for couples facing this kind of thing to explore all the possibilities and talk really deeply about how their dreams might need to evolve.
Yeah.
It also showed that, look, the husband's needs for connection and family might be valid too, but the real problem seemed to be a breakdown in talking about her intense feelings of loss and fear, and that self-perception being warped by the illness. So addressing those internal struggles, opening up communication, that was the core advice from the community.
And beyond those really intense personal situations, there are also just practical relationship challenges, right?
Yeah.
Like friends needing to be cool when plans get canceled last minute because you're not feeling well.
Oh, yeah. And the frustration of unwanted advice. Like one source said, having people play doctor, suggesting miracle cures. It's just not helpful. People usually have doctors. What they need is emotional support, not amateur medical opinions.
So true. So, okay, the emotional and relationship impacts are massive. But the sources also shed light on these significant, often kind of overlooked practical and financial realities.
Yeah, this was a major theme across the board. Chronic conditions are strongly linked to growing debt. It's like a silent crisis for so many people.
The sheer cost of healthcare,
Yeah.
especially if you're juggling multiple conditions, it's just astronomical. And that leaves less money for basics like food, heating, electricity. People are forced into impossible choices.
And then there's work. Finding and keeping a job that accommodates your needs becomes incredibly hard. Symptoms flare up. Workplaces lack flexibility. There's bias sometimes. Employers might not be able or willing to provide accommodations.
So many just struggle to stay employed.
Right. And some just can't work at all.
And relying on disability benefits. It's not the safety net you might think, is it?
Not always, no. The applications are complex, they take forever, and denials are heartbreakingly common. I saw one stat. Only about 30% of applications got approved in 2020. You might be too sick for your old job, but they might decide you could do some other job, and boom, you're disqualified. It's even tougher if you don't have a firm diagnosis yet.
Wow.
That's rough. And then you add on other costs. Maybe travel is harder or more expensive because public transport isn't accessible, you need modifications at home, specialized equipment. Even food. Specific diets, like gluten-free, one source noted, can cost significantly more. It's just this constant financial drain from all sides.
Yeah, it paints a really stark picture of that economic burden.
Yeah.
But importantly, the sources didn't just list the problems, they also offered some practical strategies people are using to try and manage the financial side.
That's right. Things like actively looking for job sites that specialize in accessible work, or considering flexible options like freelancing or remote work, contacting your insurance company, asking about discounts or assistance programs, researching charities that might help with medical bills, asking about discounts at events for people with disabilities, knowing your rights about accessible hotel room costs, finding discounted travel
And
options.
not magic billets, obviously.
No, definitely not solutions for everyone, but they are practical steps people are taking, trying to find ways to cope financially.
And these practical steps are so crucial because navigating chronic illness isn't just about managing symptoms, right? It's about managing life itself under these really challenging circumstances. Which brings us to the really powerful insights on how people build resilience and redefine what a meaningful life actually looks like.
Yeah, this is where the narrative really shifts. We move from the depth of the challenges to the pathways forward that people are finding. And a core finding here is the incredible power of finding, or maybe rediscovering, a sense of purpose. It's described as incredibly rewarding and supportive.
Purpose.
Yeah.
And that doesn't have to be some grand world-changing mission, right? It's more like your overarching why, the thing guided by your values.
Exactly. And the sources show that anchoring yourself in that purpose, it builds resilience. It gives you hope when things are tough, brings a sense of accomplishment, joy even, which can actually have positive effects on your body too.
So when life gets limited in one area, maybe new strengths or opportunities pop up elsewhere.
That's the idea. It's about acknowledging the grief for what's lost, sure, but then actively discovering and focusing on what is still possible.
And that connects directly to this idea of gentle goal setting that came up. Not pushing yourself based on old standards or what others expect, but setting realistic goals based on your current energy and abilities.
Yeah, and embracing flexibility is just non-negotiable. Building in extra time because, well, health fluctuates. Breaking goals down into tiny, manageable steps, celebrating every single little milestone, and practicing radical self-compassion when things don't go to plan. It's about progress, not perfection.
And really understanding your own body and mind seems foundational too.
Yeah.
The sources talk about needing to partner with your nervous system, really get its limits, physical, mental, energy-wise, emotionally.
Right. They bring up this concept of the window of tolerance. You can think of it as like the optimal zone where your brain and body feel regulated, able to cope effectively.
Okay.
Chronic illness, the sources say, can really shrink that window, makes it much harder to regulate your emotions, for example.
So the goal, especially with activities or setting goals, is to stay in your stretch zone, challenging yourself a bit, gently, but not pushing so hard you trigger that fight or flight reaction.
Precisely, which leads right into effective pacing strategies. That came up again and again.
Pacing seems critical.
Totally. It involves things like tracking what you do to understand how much energy different things take, consciously scheduling rest days and treating them like real commitments, not optional extras, honestly assessing how much energy you actually have before starting something. One person mentioned needing to rest every single afternoon, even on good days, just to avoid crashing later.
Starting small, being gentle with your nervous system, building confidence from things you can achieve. Right? It sounds simple, but it's a really profound shift, isn't it?
It really is. And beyond the practical stuff, the sources get into the deep emotional work involved. Acceptance is highlighted as this necessary, though often really hard step.
It's important to clarify, acceptance doesn't mean giving up, right?
Exactly. The sources define it more like surrendering to your situation, acknowledging the reality of the illness not as defeat, but as the starting point from which you can actually move forward.
Right.
And paradoxically, that surrender can sometimes lead to finding hope.
And acknowledging the grief isn't weakness either. Grieving the life you thought you'd have is normal. You don't have to just move on before you're ready. The sources were clear. Losses will hurt sometimes. Grief is a valid part of this. You got to give yourself time and permission to feel it.
Finding motivation outside yourself can also be a really powerful anchor. Maybe it's family, maybe it's faith, or a higher power, beloved pets. Finding peace in nature.
And intentionally focusing on what is still possible. Actively seeking out new interests or adapting old ones, like that story of the person who found joy in making bead jewelry after they couldn't skate or ski anymore.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. Or suggestions like virtual travel, taking online classes, things that work with physical limits but still engage your mind and spirit. The key is really dedicating time to these things, outside just managing your health.
Redefining identity is another huge piece of this journey. You might not identify with past abilities anymore, but you still have roles, parent, friend, partner.
And managing a chronic illness itself builds this incredible skill set. The sources point out you become an expert medical case manager, a meticulous organizer, a skilled negotiator with healthcare systems, a master multitasker juggling appointments, symptoms, life.
Those are real skills.
Absolutely. Worth acknowledging, being proud of. And letting others see those capacities can help change how they see you, too.
Staying in the day, or even just 1 hour at a time, that's another strategy that came up. Focusing on the present moment, current blessings, what's manageable right now, instead of getting overwhelmed by the big, scary future, helps keep perspective, reduces anxiety.
Yeah. And finally, the absolutely critical role of support. Building a supportive network, it's described not just as nice, but essential for something called co-regulation.
Co-regulation.
Yeah, basically how connecting with others who understand can literally help calm your nervous system down, making you more resilient. Finding a community of people in similar situations, people who just get it, is called instrumental. It makes the whole journey feel a lot less lonely, gives you validation, shared understanding that even the most supportive friends and family can't always provide. And technology makes connecting easier than ever, even from your couch.
The sources really stress needing that strong support system outside of medicine and therapy, just for processing the day-to-day emotional stuff. And of course, seeking professional help when you needed coaching, therapy for self-esteem or depression, couples or sex therapy for relationship issues. These are all valuable tools highlighted throughout.
So, yeah, we've kind of traveled this whole arc, haven't we? From that initial shock and the really profound losses through all the complex challenges, mental, emotional, relational, financial, and landed on these incredible ways people are finding paths to build resilience and live fully.
And while the sources are really honest that the losses hurt deeply and grief is just part of it, the overwhelming message seems to be that it doesn't automatically mean a poor quality of life. Like one account put it so beautifully, life is definitely different, but it can still be wonderful.
Yeah. That power of acceptance, the practical value of pacing and those gentle goals, the absolute necessity of strong support, and that ability to redefine your purpose and identity, these really emerge as the key pathways people are finding. It's not about pretending the illness isn't there. It's about building a rich life alongside it.
So pulling all these insights together then, here's maybe something for you, the listener, to reflect on. What does it really mean, based on all these different accounts, to be a chronic illness warrior, a term some sources used? And maybe what unexpected strengths or values or capacities might actually be forged within you when you're forced to adapt like this, to radically prioritize, and to build a life focused less on what was lost and more on what truly matters now and what is still profoundly possible.